1966, Hollywood, California. The once great Hollywood dream factories that were teeming cities of technicians and artists stood empty. The audiences for the movies these studios had produced had drifted away, busy building families or lured away by television. The old studio moguls who roamed these vast empty domains were confused and uncertain, and, like the movies they were producing, largely irrelevant. This is the story of the young artists and filmmakers who stormed the gates and briefly took control of the studios, and in the process, inadvertently created the new Hollywood.
I didn't really like American films. I didn't like what was being done in most American films at that time.
The studio system essentially collapsed in the early 60s. By 63, it was over. And nobody knew what the hell to do.
The Fox lot, the first Hollywood lot I ever saw, had been shut down by the disaster of Cleopatra. And so walking onto the Fox lot, it was really a ghost town. It had the back lot, which is now Century City. It had the streets, the western streets, the stages all set up, but it was all deserted.
Television had annihilated the habit audience for movies, and studios were impoverished.
Their big old films weren't making money, the Molly Maguires and Hello, Dolly. This is huge flops.
The old people are dying slowly, otherwise the representatives of the Puritanism and religion and other organisms which were restricting. The young people are quite different. They demand different things. Make it new, they say. Make it different.
And it really was a strong sense of a revolution happening. And if you were 18 years old, as I was, God forbid you should ally yourselves with the old fogies.
Even as American films became more meaningless, foreign films were beginning to find an emerging audience, hungry for something different.
There were a lot of what we called art theaters where you could go and watch foreign films. That's where Natalie and James Dean and all of us went. And I was working in American films, but I was looking at foreign films.
Most of the filmmakers of that period were brought up on Godard and Truffaut and Fellini, and they were tremendously influenced by the Europeans.
This was the period of the Nouvelle Vague in France, and everybody was bowled over by what Jean-Luc had done with Breathless and what Truffaut had done with 400 Blows. And when I was in Paris, we became friends, or conversants anyway.
In New York, two young magazine writers named Robert Benton and David Newman, who had fallen under the spell of the French New Wave, decided to try their hand at screenwriting.
We didn't know anything about writing movies, because there weren't any, believe me, maybe they were somewhere, but we didn't know about screenwriting courses. There was no books by McKee or any of those gurus around. And we just wrote the movie we wanted to see.
Newman and Benton used their connections from Esquire magazine, where they created the Dubious Achievement Awards, to get their script for Bonnie and Clyde to Francois Truffaut.
He took this treatment of ours and he just broke it down into sections, and he explained to us the difference between film time and real time. And I can't tell you, we just filled notebooks up with notes, and by the end of it, we would just, you know, if the gate had opened, we were running.
As the neophyte screenwriters received lessons from the New Wave master, Arthur Penn had returned from France inspired and eager to make a film that could draw on this new storytelling style. It would be called Mickey 1.
At that point, Beatty called me up out of the blue and said, "I'm Warren Beatty." And I said, why are you calling me? And he said, well, you know, I learned early on that the people I want to work with are the good directors. That's it. He said, so I'm with you. I said, I can't even hardly pay you, you know? Doesn't matter. I'm in the movie.
I used to be quite a fighter. I really was. I'll never forget my first opponent. He was also my last opponent. He was a little guy. He only came up to my chin.
Trouble was he came up too often.
Watch it, Buster. You've heard of ground beef. I'll never forget I had this opponent covered with blood.
Yours?
Kid, when you're working.
You come and monkey around with my mop.
Oh, I can see this kid believes in justice.
Getting just as drunk as he can.
Waiter, let me mix this man's next drink.
Blessed are the pure in spirits. There's nothing wickeder than a mixed drink. I wouldn't say this kid gets drunk, but they caught him last night putting pennies in a parking meter and looking up at the clock on the Wrigley building to see how much he weighed.
Brother Rat, get him up here.
When I shot Mickey 1, both Jean-Luc and Francois Truffaut showed up in Chicago while I was shooting.
Truffaut had recently passed the Bonnie and Clyde script onto Jean-Luc Godard after deciding to film Fahrenheit 451. Godard flirted with the project briefly before deciding to shoot Alphaville instead. Meanwhile, Arthur Penn's star, Warren Beatty, was growing increasingly frustrated by the limitations of being just another handsome movie star, bound in by the creative restrictions of studio-produced pictures.
Warren Beatty was in Paris making a movie and having, I think, a romance with Leslie Caron. And one night they went to dinner somewhere at somebody's apartment, and he found himself sitting next to Truffaut. And Truffaut said, "There's a movie you should read because it's a great part for you. It's written by these two guys in New York." And Warren came back to New York a week later and called and said, "I've read half of it, and I want to option it as soon as it's ready. And not only do I want to play the part, I want to produce the film."
That was after I had decided not to direct it myself. Arthur was available. It afforded an opportunity to work with someone with whom I had already established a certain dialogue with, someone who was aware of my bad habits, excesses, and someone whose excesses and bad habits I was aware of.
What are your bad habits and excesses?
I don't even want to go into them.
What are his?
I don't want to go into those either.
Beatty agreed to work for little money up front in order to convince a reluctant Jack Warner to give the script a green light.
Warren called me and said he had this script. And I read it, and it was a very good script, very well written, but at the end of it, they just simply got shot, and that was the end of it. And I thought, I don't want to do a film about two gangsters. Then I woke up one day and I saw the ending, exactly as it is in the film.
Hey.
Well, Jack Warner thought it was a terrible, he didn't like the picture at all.
We went out to Jack's house. We were about to look at the film. He said, "If I have to get up and pee, you know it stinks." Well, we weren't 10 minutes into the film when he got up and peed, came back. Another 10 minutes, he got up and peed. And it went like that throughout. And then finally the film ended. And he said, "What the hell is this?" And there was kind of quiet in the room, and then Warren said, "Well, you know, Jack, what it is really is an homage to the great gangster films of the wonderful Warner Brothers era." And Jack sort of bit that, and then he looked at Warren and said, "What the fuck's an homage?"
As Beatty tried to win over the old studio mogul, there was a young mogul working outside the dying studio system who was training a new generation of filmmakers in the art of the low-budget B-movie. By the middle of the 60s, producer-director Roger Corman and American International Pictures had built a thriving business of making ultra-low-budget B pictures the studio felt were beneath their dignity. He had, in fact, become so successful, he started hiring up-and-comers who couldn't get in the studio gates.
They get young talent in because they'll work for the amount of, for the salary, for no salary, practically, you know, which is the way it should be. You come in just to do the film, anything to do the film.
He wasn't a brilliant director. What he did do, he was brilliant in recognizing talent in other people. So he gave people like me and Hopper, Marty Scorsese, he gave a whole bunch of really tough. Peter Bogdanovich was working on Wild Angels, second unit camera. It's great.
One of Roger Corman's first protégés was a grad student just out of UCLA, Francis Ford Coppola.
Francis made his debut editing Russian science fiction films, then worked as an assistant director on a racing film I was doing in Europe on the Grand Prix Formula One circuit called The Young Racers, and went on from there to Ireland to do Dementia 13, which was his first film as a director.
Don't touch her!
Corman had become a prime supplier to a newly evolving audience that the studios were ignoring.
In the 60s, there were about 4,000 to 5,000 drive-in theaters in this country. Everywhere, all over, you know, every town had a drive-in.
The drive-in audience was a young audience, and the kids liked these action and horror films, the type of pictures the independents were turning out. Sometimes they liked them more than the major studio films.
Corman was very bright in picking his subjects. LSD becomes in the paper, he makes The Trip. Motorcycle guys get in the paper, he makes a motorcycle movie. Bingo, Blanket, Beach Party, whatever those movies were, they make those. So they were serving a function, you know, fast cars, motorcycles, drugs. But the one thing great about Corman was he wouldn't pay you, but he would give you camera and film and let you go shoot on weekends. Shot the stuff on the Strip, shot all the acid kind of trips and so on of him fantasizing the desert. And I directed those things, and that was the first time that I'd really had a camera and been able to go out and shoot stuff.
The drive-ins or the art houses, that's where you found young, hip moviegoers in the summer of '67. And that's just where Warner Brothers released that violent bank robber movie they didn't have much faith in.
And Liz Smith, a cosmopolitan, calls it possibly the best film of the year.
New Republic, possibly the best film of the year.
And Gene Shalit and Joyce Illig both agree in the Ladies' Home Journal that it is possibly the best film of the year.
Right, and went initially to...
I know a lot of my friends, liberals, hated that picture, thought it was violent, and, you know, were furious at me. I never understood why their kids would go to it 4, 5, 6 times. They just didn't understand that picture. Because it was about, as Jack Warner said, you can't tell the good guys from the bad guys, you know.
Bonnie and Clyde's anti-establishment stance made it a huge hit, perfectly reflecting the disillusionment of that winter of '67, '68. With protests against the Vietnam War, race riots in the ghetto, and anarchy in the streets, the younger generation was angry and speaking out. No one was more surprised than this disenfranchised audience that they might have a sympathetic ally in Hollywood. Raised on a steady diet of old films running on television, the early '60s spawned the first generation of movie buffs that saw film as an art form that they were determined to be a part of.
I used to see Peter when he was writing for Esquire and barely keeping alive. As a matter of fact, we'd go to screenings at, say, at the Directors Guild, and he was always the first person at the table to get some food. It was clearly his only meal of the day.
Bogdanovich came west with new bride Polly Platt looking for a way to break into movies.
We met Roger, we went to see last year at Marienbad, I'm pretty sure. That was the film. And he was sitting behind us.
We got talking after the screening. We all went out and had a couple of drinks, and I became friendly with Peter, and he worked with me. as a second unit director and general production assistant on The Wild Angels.
They're wild and no angels, law-defying, getting their kicks from violence and torture. The Wild Angels, starring Peter Fonda and Nancy Sinatra.
And I met with Roger, and he said, now we're going to make a movie about the Hells Angels without making a statement. And I thought, making a movie about the Hells Angels on its own is a statement. That's far out. Let's see how this guy does it.
Their intimacies, a rape of decency. Their every enjoyment, a parody of pleasure.
Roger kept missing shots. You know, he would fall behind during the day, and he would kept saying, well, we'll shoot that in second unit. And I had never heard of that, but Peter was onto it.
I did everything you could possibly do, from ordering the lunches and making sure the laundry was out to rewriting 80% of the script without credit and directing 3 weeks of the second unit.
The Wild Angels was a major hit for Corman, and, as was his habit, he rewarded the young Bogdanovich with a chance to direct his own picture, if he could figure out how to use an existing Corman asset.
He said, take some footage from the Terror, shoot some additional footage with Boris Karloff, who owes me 2 days. And we looked at the movie and we were just devastated because we could not think of anything. I kept saying to Peter, why are these old Victorian horror films not scary? Peter he was shaving one morning and he walked out and he said, we'll use The Terror as a movie within the movie, and we'll have Boris Karloff play an aging horror picture star who speaks for us. You know, and he's the one who says, you know, these pictures are not frightening anymore. I'm a dinosaur.
And the other plot line is this young, all-American, good-looking boy who starts buying guns. And we see him, you know, spreading all his gun and eating a kind of a chocolate bar, very cool, and picks up as a rifle, telescopic rifle, and start aiming. And it's a very frightening movie because he starts shooting.
The film was so well made, Corman was able to sell it to Paramount Pictures. Paramount, like many of the old studios, was in serious trouble when it was acquired by Gulf and Western, a conglomerate headed by a mad Austrian.
Charles Bludon was his name, an Austrian-born fellow of megalomaniacal dimensions.
You think I make money on pictures? I don't make money on pictures. You know where I make money? Zinc, sugar. That's where I make money. Not pictures is bullshit. But I like it, and you know, I like to do it sometimes. But zinc.
And there was no logical business reason. I mean, let's put it this way. Charlie Bludon did not have a business plan as to what to do with Paramount. There was no grand design. He loved Hollywood, like Pretty Women, and thought that he was a business in chaos. Maybe there was an opportunity here.
One of Bludorn's first decisions was to hire failed actor-turned-producer Bob Evans to run the West Coast operations. Hollywood wags assumed that Evans was a very attractive pimp for Charlie Bludorn. After all, who but a pimp would want to take over the moribund Paramount?
We were suffering with an inventory of films that had already been started. You had to get through first that dreadful period where we made Bludorn's Dreams, you know, musicals like Paint Your Wagon, when I had to sit in the screening room and listen to Lee Marvin and Clint Eastwood sing as dailies. You know, I thought, why did I leave the New York Times to listen to Lee Marvin singing?
Evans and Bart signaled Paramount's change of direction by signing the director of the European horror film Repulsion, Roman Polanski, to his first real studio deal for Rosemary's Baby. The picture was a big hit for Paramount, and the elfin, fun-loving Polish Polanski quickly became a part of Bob Evans' social scene. Evans would introduce Polanski to other young power players in the new Hollywood, including pals Warren Beatty and Jack Nicholson. Women, wine, parties, and good blow were some of the rewards of success in Hollywood, and Polanski, Nicholson, and Evans would, over the years, share their drugs and their women. But what none of these revelers could know was how often violence would crash their parties and change their lives, starting with Paramount's scheduled release of Targets in the summer of '68.
So, my thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you.
I had my baby, my daughter, on my hip and had gone to vote for him. And that night, I remember when he was assassinated, after the initial shock and horror, I realized it was the end of Targets. I knew that no one would want to go see that movie.
Following the Kennedy assassination, the studio yanked targets from theaters. But for Roger Corman and the others involved in making the youth-oriented B-movie so successful at the drive-ins, it was a boom time, with one hit after another. The old studio bosses, however, continued hiding behind their high walls with their heads in the sand. But there was one studio head, Stanley Schneider at Columbia Pictures, who had a son, young enough and hip enough to hear the rumble coming down the road.
Bert is the single most significant person in post-1950s in terms of, I mean, he is the equivalent in terms of producers of what Selznick had been before. He revolutionized and radicalized filmmaking from the producer side. And mainly, he trusted filmmakers, and he gave them complete creative freedom.
Bert Schneider was the epitome of a certain kind of time and place producer. Everyone wanted to be Bert Schneider, and then nobody wanted to be Bert Schneider. Well, he was cool. He was so cool, it was like frightening.
He provided the drugs, he provided the sauna, he provided the pool, he provided the good vibes, he provided the notion that nobody should ever feel shitty.
I always thought Bert was kind of mean. Kind of scared me. You know, of course, I met Bob later, and he's like a beautiful rebel kind of guy, Bob.
Bob Rafelson, a hip young writer-producer, and Bert Schneider, an exec at Columbia Pictures, had hooked up as friends in New York and came west with an attitude. They created Ray Bert Productions, a television and motion picture production company.
He was the center of an extraordinary little community.
How do you feel now?
Oh, come see, come sa.
All right, that's enough. Cut it. Print it, please. Good hit. All right, that should be it. Okay. I think we're on another set.
Hey, Bob, that's not right, man.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
you know, about hitting a girl.
Over
Hey,
there.
is that all right, man? Does that look good?
I thought it looked great.
Yeah, but about hitting a woman and everything. Man, it's about the image and everything. It's not right.
Peter, I
hate to interrupt. Yeah, I know it's for your beast. It's quite all right. What's your name?
Mary.
All right, fellas, let's move over to the right. Thank you. Peter, you got it? John, was that right, man?
Yeah, fine,
John,
man.
that's not right. You got to
Hey,
this.
can you move over to stage
Look at me,
5?
Bob. It
Stage
has to do.
5.
I'll see you
Man,
later,
it's a
Peter.
kid. Bob, it's a movie for kids. They're not going to dig it, man.
The Beatles were very popular then, and Bob got the idea of doing a television show based on a rock group. And so he created the Monkees. It was an extremely successful show.
Well, from my perspective at the time, Ray Bert was just these couple of guys. Very young for people in the industry at that time. Every other audition I'd ever been to was some big fat guy in a suit with a cigar going, "Yeah, all right, want to read a few lines?"
Bert Schneider's father ran Columbia Pictures. It was there that Bert and Bob pitched their idea for an American version of the Beatles.
The Monkees, in some way, were simply a cynical decision to rip off the Beatles and be successful in the most traditional terms on television.
We were never allowed on the television show to reference the war, ever, to reference society in anything anti-American, anything controversial, certainly no references to even getting stoned. You know, it was all really sickly, sweet, you know, white bread.
The economic success of that put Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson into the catbird seat. And what they chose to do with that is what's interesting.
Even as television was embracing youth programming, the studios still didn't get it. But Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson sure did. Flush with money from the success of the Monkees, they knew there was an untapped audience for something different.
Peter started talking about what at that time was called the loners, because I had called it the loners, the Easy Rider. Jack Nicholson had actually talked Bert into this, I believe, by saying, these bike movies make money. You'll make your money back. You're not going to lose any money here. So Schneider said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the money to go and shoot this. You shoot it in 16 millimeter. And if I like what I see, then I'll give you the rest of the money to make the, feature movie. So I got 5 friends of mine that had 16mm cameras, all of them who wanted to be directors, okay, in the middle of Mardi Gras, and I was crazy. There's no question about it.
Get into the Winnie in search of the Mardi Gras parade, which, if you've seen the movie more than once, you'll notice we were never in. The Winnebago never found the Mardi Gras parade. And there are reasons for that. Everyone was stoned out of his mind. Each person was stoned out of, everyone was stoned out of his mind. That's correct, isn't it? Dennis was just shooting, like he's gonna get New Orleans, man, which he did.
We shot for 4 days, and I literally walked people through the streets practically. It was like the Baton Death March. Finally, Barry Feinstein, he finally said, I can't take any more of this, and he started throwing the films at me, cans of films at me, and he said, that's it, you know. I said, well, if you can't take any more, give me the film, I don't trust you anymore. He said, you want the film? Here's the, he started throwing. So we get into a fist fight, pushes me into a room that Peter's in bed with Karen and Tony Basil, and a fight proceeds, whereupon it ends, and everybody leaves.
After shooting the acid trip scene at the cemetery, Hopper and Fonda returned to Los Angeles.
I get back, and unbeknownst to me, that Peter and Bill Hayward, my brother-in-law, came back from New Orleans and offered to give back the $20,000 that obviously that I was a crazy person. And what they had done was they started taping me, my screaming and my raving and ranting. And they played this for Bert Schneider and Jack Nicholson. And Bert said, well, he sounds excited, but you know something? I hired this man to direct this movie. He's going to direct this movie.
Oh, they're not scared of you. They're scared of what you represent to them. Amen. All we represent to them, man, is somebody who needs a haircut. Oh, no. What you represent to them is freedom. What the hell's wrong with freedom, man? That's what it's all about. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's what it's all about, all right. But talking about it and being it, that's two different things. I mean, it's real hard to be free when you are bought and sold in the marketplace. Of course, don't ever tell anybody that they're not free, because then they're going to get real busy killing and maiming to prove to you that they are.
On the main poster for Easy Rider, which was interesting, there wasn't a motorcycle on it. The phrase on the top said, a man went looking for America and couldn't find it anywhere. When we all, the hippies, when we all arrived up to the sales office at Columbia when it was down on Gower Street, we thought, what are these guys going to know? We walked in and saw that. That's got to be it. It's amazing. That came out of far out. Put it in. It's great.
As Columbia prepared Easy Rider for release, United Artists was about to start the most controversial studio picture to date.
There was at UA at that time this extraordinary group of people who had an extraordinary concept about how to finance and distribute films.
Well, UA had created a world that the majors were not aware of, and studios didn't understand the concept of giving creative control of a movie to a filmmaker. We did it with every filmmaker that we were in business with.
One filmmaker UA wanted to work with was John Schlesinger, who had recently scored with Darling, which won its star, future Beatty Paramore Julie Christie, an Academy Award.
I can go to John Schlesinger, as I did, and said, we want to make a movie with you. What do you want to do? And he can say, well, there's this little book, you'll never do it, it's very dark, and it turns out to be Midnight Cowboy. It never would have been made under the studio system.
John was like at a real turning point at the Cowboy time. He was in the closet. His close friends all knew that he was gay, but he was desperate to break out. He's a gay man, and he wanted to have a gay partner, and he wanted to live a gay life. And he had all these archaic ideas that if the crew knew that he was gay, that he'd ask them to do something and say, fuck you, faggot. You faggot, get out of here. I mean, these childhood dreams that must have tormented him and all that. So I just said, look, John, it's our movie. If we don't like someone, we'll throw him out. He got it through his head that maybe it would be all right, although he was very frightened. And then he fell in love. He fell in love with a man who he's still with now, 39 years later. And John was like, any one of us, if you're in love, I mean, you're totally on fire with ideas. And He was inspired, there's no question about it.
Well, when's the last time you've been to confession? That's between me and my confessor. And I'll tell you another thing. Frankly, you're beginning to smell. And for a stud in New York, that's a handicap. Well, don't talk to me about clean. I ain't never seen you change your underwear once the whole time I've been here in New York. And that's pretty peculiar behavior. I don't have to do that kind of thing in public. I ain't got no need to expose myself. No, I bet you don't. I bet you ain't never even been laid. How about that? And you're gonna tell me what appeals to women. I know enough to know that that great big dumb cowboy crap of yours don't appeal to nobody except every jackie on 42nd Street. That's faggot stuff. You want to call it by its name, that's strictly for fags. John Wayne, you don't tell me he's a fag?
The film would be nominated for 7 Oscars, win 3, including Best Picture, and be the first studio film released with an X rating. 1969 continued to rock the movie business. Woody Allen and Paul Mazursky directed their first features. Haskell Wexler did Medium Cool, and Robert Altman's antisocial MASH won over Fox. But the biggest shakeup came as the quintessential American drive-in movie premiered at Cannes.
This is the spring of '69, and there's an anti-festival going on at the same time. And of course, we win the anti-festival. And the film blew everybody away so badly they actually created a category for it, so it could be given a prize at Cannes. It was tremendous. People did not know how to take us at all. They just, you know, we were all bearded or long-haired, and, you know, it was very far out.
Nobody thought that Easy Rider was really going to become a seminal film, though. I mean, I thought it was just another bike movie.
And there'd been a lot of dialogue about Easy Rider because they were having all kinds of problems putting it together, and this bunch of hippies had gone out and they were stoned and they made this movie, and it was never going to go together, and they'd spent, you know, $600,000-700,000, whatever it was, and that was kind of the rap on the movie that at least we heard. And then it went out, and it was boffo. I mean, it was genuine shock.
Get your motor running, head out on the highway, looking for adventure, and whatever comes our way. Yeah, darling, go.
I don't think that the Hollywood establishment could figure out why anybody was going to see that movie, and that was just. It seems to me that was just as the change was happening. I mean, it was Vietnam. I mean, it was long hair was becoming more popular.
They'd lost their audience. They had not addressed their audience. They had not addressed what their audience were into. We'd gone through the '60s, and nobody had ever seen drugs smoked without, you know, going out and committing some kind of murder or atrocity of some kind.
When you went to see a movie like Easy Rider, and when you saw these guys really smoking grass by the fire, and really the camaraderie was warm and real and rare, you went, what the hell am I looking at? This has value. This has a completely different kind of value than pillow talk. This is something extraordinary. I want more of that. And then I think they went a bit far because I kept seeing movies where people vomited.
I want you to meet my fiancée.
Another emerging talent brought a whole new level of violent realism to the screen. His name was Sam Peckinpah. He liked drinking, women, and brawling with studio executives. His violent lyricism would change movies forever.
First time I worked for Sam, he wrote The Rifleman. He hadn't directed at this point, but he came around the set and would whisper to me constantly, why don't you try this, why don't you do this, so on. So I was the guest star in The Rifleman, which sold, and he always got an income from. So that was when I first knew him. And he was one of the few guys that I knew in the inside that smoked grass. So he and I used to smoke in his office.
I knew Sam at the time of Wild Bunch, hanging around him. And I wrote a long article about him, and I just thought he was brilliant. And I saw the 3 hour and 45-minute version of the Wild Bunch, which I thought was the most brilliant thing I'd ever fucking seen.
The Wild Bunch was, in part, an allegory for America's increasingly violent involvement in Vietnam. But fortunately, the violence of the new cinema, in Hollywood at least, had been limited to the screen. And for most of those at the top of the emerging new Hollywood, life was a non-stop party with an unending flow of beautiful women and men eager to explore the new sexual freedom that was enhanced and encouraged with the best drugs money could buy. Everybody knew everybody else, and it seemed like the high would last forever. Then, on the morning of August 9th, 1969, Charlie Manson's followers broke into Roman Polanski's house in Benedict Canyon and butchered Polanski's pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, and 4 others, while the director was away in Europe. Rumors flew of orgies and drug abuse.
There was a lot of talk about drugs. Sharon not only didn't use drugs, she didn't touch alcohol, she didn't smoke cigarettes. The last film she made was not a very happy experience for her, but her greatest picture she was doing was her pregnancy. I never seen a woman more preoccupied with it. The house is open now, the police has released it, and you can go and see the orgy place. You will see a lot of blood all over the place. Cradles, baby clothes, and that's all.
We all knew Sharon, and we knew, you know, J.C. Breen. We knew these people that were part of our everyday life out here. And suddenly they're all chopped up and messed around. A lot of rage in there, huh? Well, there was a lot of rage in the hippie communities, and just on the street in the hippie sides, because the voice was not being heard, because the war was going on, because it was still whacked out, because we were blowing it.
The whole trick and the secret is of creating a film by literally saying you're doing it. I mean, it's not a matter of asking someone to let you make a movie.
Francis is the smartest of all the filmmakers in terms of trying to bring filmmakers together and do interesting things and move into technology and move the rest of the world into technology.
The idea is you gotta really, you've gotta really want to do something, and then nothing can stop you, I believe.
I thought that he was just, you know, another, you know, sort of mistake in the security of Hollywood, you know. I looked at the whole thing as sort of a walled city, and there were breaches in the defenses. Occasionally you could get in through one of these breaches and you know, see what was on the other side of the wall. That didn't mean that the police wouldn't find you sooner or later.
On the Rain people, Warner Brothers didn't want me to make them. I mean, they couldn't care less about this movie. I merely went into them one day and I said, it's Friday, Tuesday, we're flying to New York and we're going to shoot some film for my new movie. They said, what's it about? What's the story? You know, we got to approve it. I said, well, if you don't want to make it, I'll pay for it myself.
When I made Easy Rider, he was coming across the top. I was going across the south of the country and he was going across the north. He was doing the Rain people.
Francis Ford Coppola is the writer-director on the crest of the new wave of American filmmakers. Already he has been named Best Director, and the Rain People awarded the grand prize at the San Sebastian Festival in Spain.
He'd gotten on the wall somehow, and he'd gotten, you know, the local authorities convinced that he should be there. And of course, he brought in the Trojan horse.
Would you tell something about your young assistant, George Lucas?
Oh, he's not my assistant, actually.
Could you tell us about your young...
Associate.
Associate, okay.
George won an award to come to Warner Brothers and observe a film being made there, and he came when we were making Finian's Rainbow, and one day I was working on a show, and I kept seeing the skinny kid with a beard, and he was always looking. I went up to him and I said, well, you know, I said, who's that? And he said, well, he's observing you.
I think the student films are the only real hope. I think they're slowly beginning to realize that students know what they're doing.
There was an issue of Time magazine, and it had pictures of all of us in there, and we just won the National Student Film Festival. I won it for Marcello, I'm so bored. George won it for THX. Marty Scorsese won for one of his films, or his probably was a real film.
Mike Medavoy was a young talent agent, barely out of the mailroom, when he went looking for the next big thing.
So I called my secretary and said, hey, find these guys, let's call them. So I went up and I called John Milius. I went out and signed him, signed Spielberg, signed a few others.
He was a very, very good agent. He was a terrible deal maker. He'd get you anything. If the guy, had said, well, I really can't. I want to hire the guy, but I've only got $35. Metaboy would take the $35. But what was good about that was it kept you working.
As the oldest of the film school grads, Francis Coppola set up Zoetrope as a production banner for emerging talent.
Two of the new generation of film men, Francis Coppola and George Lucas, are discussing director Lucas' new movie, THX 1138.
George, where did the very first idea of Thex come to you?
It actually came from reading comic books when I was about 10 years old.
Well, Zoetrope was the first attempt by a kind of outsider filmmaker who was going to bring together and form a commune of filmmakers. And it's to Francis's credit that he tried to put it together.
Everybody had like a 6-picture deal with Francis. So it was about 6 other filmmakers, my husband among them, whose projects were supposed to go at Warner's.
The deal was we were driving to Warner Brothers. Francis would show them THX, which was American Zoetrope's flagship first production. And then they would be presented with these silver boxes with our scripts.
They saw THX, everyone's project was canceled.
Lucas was angry and humiliated by Warner Brothers' reaction to the film and the studio's cancellation of the other Zoetrope projects. A crushed Francis Coppola withdrew to San Francisco, taking a high-paying script job on the film Patton.
The whole thing was that Francis was kind of regarded as this guy who'd sold them out. Francis was the establishment now.
While Francis Coppola was trying to explain to Lucas, Huyck, and the others why he couldn't save their projects, Peter Bogdanovich was trying to get his next directing job.
Bert Schneider was looking for new films to do after Easy Rider's success. And he had made a deal with me to let me direct my first movie, A Safe Place, which Jack Nicholson agreed to be in. And Jack Nicholson was given the permission to direct his first film, Drive, he said. And along the way, I thought of Peter.
They said to me, well, if you ever have a picture you want to make, we'd be interested in making a picture with you. So not too long after that, I called and said, there's a book I'd like to do called The Last Picture Show. You can get it in paperback. Larry McMurtry wrote it. Bert said, well, send it on over. I said, why don't you buy it? Arrogant, thinking, well, if he can't even buy the book, then he's not going to be interested in making it. So about a week later, he called me and said, well, it took me a while to find the goddamn book, but we got it, and we'd like to make it.
So we made the movie. It was full of lots of drama.
The Last Picture Show was a frank, almost European exploration of sexuality in a classic American filmmaking style. It was also an emotionally painful experience for its makers, the husband and wife team of director Peter Bogdanovich and production designer Polly Platt.
We were in pre-production in LA, and we were already looking at actors and actresses to play these parts. And I saw a magazine cover at this check stand of Ralph's Market. And there was this girl with what I thought looked like a sexual chip on her shoulder, corkscrew curls, blonde hair, blue eyes, just arrogant little thing, although she turns out to be a tall girl. And I said to Peter, doesn't that look like JC? It's just the way JC should look. And Peter said, yes. And, he said about finding her.
I know you couldn't do it. Now I'll never get to not be a virgin. Why don't we tell everybody? The whole class knows. I just want to cry. I think you're the meanest boy I ever saw. My mother was dead right about you.
I don't know what happened.
Don't go out there. You haven't time to do it. They know. I don't want one soul to know. You better not tell one soul. You just pretend it was wonderful.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened.
Oh! If you say that one more time, I'll bite you.
Lay out the cards from left to right.
Oh, gee, tell me about it, JC. What was it like? I just can't describe it. I just can't describe it in words.
I had an affair with Jeff Bridges very briefly, and then he went away for a National Guard duty.
reserve. And that was when Peter made that fateful comment to me. We were shooting the scene in the theater, my first scene in the movie. And he was sitting in the row behind me, leaned forward and said, "I don't know who I want more, you or JC." And I was so struck by that. And they said, "We're ready, Sybil." And I had to get up and go and make that entrance where I come in and say, "What y'all doing back here in the dark?" And I mean, it lit that moment. It lit that moment. It was real. And Peter meant it, but it was also, you couldn't have told, well, me, certainly at that time, anything else that would have, I was lit up.
Her boyfriend back in New York didn't want her to show her breasts or do any of the nude scenes in the movie. And so there were all these tears and, drama. And I remember, I saw my husband falling in love with her or falling in, developing this crush on her. And I remember being grateful that she even had a boyfriend, And Peter asked me, it was very interesting, he said, "Do you think I should fire her? Because she won't do these nude scenes." And I said, no.
I don't think anything could have stopped it. I feel very badly in many ways now that I'm a little wiser. For Polly, I know that must have been hell for her.
I even, in a certain way, I understood, I felt it was an occupational hazard of the job. I just thought it might be a temporary thing.
I've learned since, over many years, that I was far more like JC than I ever imagined in real life. If I had it to do all over again, I would do the same.
While Bogdanovich's marriage was coming apart, Warren Beatty was winning a reputation as Hollywood's premier bachelor. However, his follow-up to Bonnie and Clyde, the only game in town, wasn't scoring nearly as well. Beatty needed a hit, and he believed strongly in directors.
John McCabe. He came with poetry on his lips.
Frog had wings, he wouldn't bump his ass so much.
A deck in his pocket.
What do you say we make this a nickel game, huh? Start off with.
A man who knew where he was going.
Where you go?
Nowhere. I was just wondering where you was gonna go.
Well, I was gonna go over there by that fence.
The only problem was the director of his next film, Robert Altman, believed the only star on an Altman film was Robert Altman. And Beatty, after successfully producing Bonnie and Clyde, was not prepared to play a supporting role even to his director.
Warren kept worrying about coverage because he had produced Bonnie and Clyde, and he, by that time he had a sense of what you needed to cut away to, and Bob doesn't direct that way. So the times when things got testy, it was really a matter of style. Warren is very precise, and you have to honor that. But he's not the director or making the film at that moment in time.
There was a scene actually going on about 8 minutes. It's a wonderful scene. We shot with 2 cameras. So 2 cameras, 8 minutes long, and we did it about 40 times. I imagine just how many rolls of film that was. Was that 80 rolls of film? Because we had to use 80 rolls of film. That's 80,000 feet of film. So we went probably about, 37 or 38. When Robert said, well, it's not getting better. I told you that take 8 was perfect for me and all that. You kept going and all that, I'm happy with take 8. And Warren says, I want to do one more. And then Robert said, okay, Warren, I tell you what, I'm tired, I'm going to go home. You do as many takes as you want to. These boys are going to take it, for you. Just finish it when you want to. Then he went home.
Neither Beatty or Altman came away happy, and McCabe would mark the last time that a star would destabilize one of Altman's productions. As Beatty struggled with Altman, Dennis Hopper was planning his next film.
Well, I'm going to now make the movie that I wanted to make as my first movie, which is called The Last Movie. It starts with the last scene of the movie being shot, and the company leaves, and these people are left with the streets, where one man becomes the director, and he makes the people build a stick camera, and he makes them act out the violence that he saw the movie company acting out.
After being turned down by his former partners at BBS, Dennis Hopper took his new project to Universal Pictures, which set up its own low-budget division, headed by Ned Tannen, to try to cash in on the youth market.
A friend of mine was flying with Dennis Hopper on an airplane, and he said, Dennis loves me and Bob McGee, and he wants to hear some more of your songs, because he's going to be making a movie, and he wants to see if he can do the music for it. And so my publisher flew me out to L.A. out here, and Dennis took my songs around and showed them to Phil Spector, and at the end of it, he said, will you go down to Peru with me? I'm making this movie, which was the last movie. And he took me down there to do the music for it.
I was just remembering the plane trip down to Peru was one of the scariest things I've ever been in. I mean, here was a plane full of strange people, including myself, but they were all so loaded and walking up and down the aisles and singing and dancing, and the plane was rocking. It was a Peruvian airline. I don't know what it was. It was really a ship of fools, you know. It's amazing that anybody got out of that alive.
By the time I got down to Peru, I think he'd already antagonized the Catholic Church, the military junta, the communists who were building the road that we had to take from Cusco up to Chinchero, where they were filming.
They cast all these friends of Dennis's, Mitchum's son and all these other guys that were huge guys, and they rode on horses and they took enormous quantity of serious drugs.
Mixed together with being high in the Andes, in the cocaine capital of the world. It was a very insane scene. But for me, it was an interesting introduction to the film, to movies, you know.
What the hell? Hey, hold it, cut! What the goddamn hell's the matter with you, Tex? Where the hell have you been?
My name's Cans. I'm sorry.
I don't care.
Well, I didn't realize.
I didn't realize. Who hired him? Okay, I'll get
He's supposed to be in the shop.
I don't give a goddamn. Did you hire him?
Yeah, I hired him.
All right, get your positions again, and on a double. Come on, we've been on this damn shot too long. Hey, Cans, will you quit spooking that goddamn horse? We're trying to get the shot here.
The movie was in Dennis's mind, so nobody else seemed to know what was going on or what was happening.
I was convinced that we had a good movie in our can, and so we all come back. Dennis goes to Taos, New Mexico, and I think he bought D.H. Lawrence estate, which is a beautiful compound and all, and he decided he's going to edit the film there. Of course, he invited all his buddies and everybody, and it was an endless 24-hour parties, you know, and all that stuff, you know, and spending money and all, and everybody was talking into giving advice, you know, you should do this, that. And basically what had happened, really, Dennis screwed it up, you know, in editing, you know, and he didn't let anybody, a professional editor, come in, and that's what he should have done.
He was pretty much going his own way. I think Dennis had probably been fighting so long to do it his way that when he got a budget which seemed outlandish at the time, I think it was $1 million, he was not going to be pushed around by anybody.
I wasn't going to re-edit the movie, which is what he wanted me to do.
They recut it.
No, they never could recut it because I had final cut. But I had final cut and cut my own throat.
The picture's demise was the first threat to the new power studios were giving directors. Over at Paramount, studio heads Robert Evans and Peter Bart were about to find themselves homeless.
Well, what happened was that reduced to simplest terms, the mafia bought the lot with the Vatican Bank as a front. It was arranged by a rather unsavory character named Michele Sindona. I say to you, he was a bit unsavory. I mean, he ended up being murdered in a jail in Sicily, which I would suggest is a reasonable qualification for unsavory. But at this moment in time, he was a banker. He bought the lot, immediately started shooting porn movies on the lot.
Evans and Bart moved Paramount's offices to Beverly Hills. While all this was going on, Mario Puzo approached his friend Bob Evans, desperately in need of cash for gambling debts. Evans wrote a check on the spot for $10 grand for an outline Puzo gave him about the mafia.
The book was published, and this obscure project that I was nursing along that no one paid any attention to was the #1 bestseller in the world. Suddenly everybody in the studio and in the parent company and had a better idea as to who should direct it and who should star in it.
And we talked to everybody. Evans and I talked to almost everybody. Nobody wanted to do it. It glorified the mafia. It made them Robin Hoods and all the excuses you can think of.
All of a sudden, everybody got off the picture. The picture couldn't be put together. And suddenly it turned up on my desk again as an almost abandoned project. So went back to plan A.
I got a call from Peter asking me if I'm interested in producing The Godfather. I couldn't catch my breath for a minute. And of course I said, beyond the shadow of a doubt. He said, well, the one caveat is Charlie Bluhdorn wants to meet. He has to approve the producer and the director of The Godfather. Can you come to New York and meet Mr. Bluhdorn? I said, absolutely. So I come to Stanley's office. The adjoining door flies open. It's Charlie Bluhdorn, this hyper-wacko Austrian. Buddy, I'm Charlie Bluhdorn. Now, that was the last line. Doesn't ask me how was the flight, nothing. He said, what do you mind to do with this movie? I looked at him, I looked at my book. If I start discussing this book, it's the end of the meeting. I said, Charlie, I want to make an ice blue, terrifying movie about people you love. That's brilliant. He jumps, he runs out of the office, slams the door. I said, Stanley, what the hell is that? He said, I'll find out. Goes in the other room. He said, Charlie thinks you're a genius, you got the job.
Hollywood was stunned when Paramount announced that their blockbuster bestseller was to be directed by Francis who?
Francis had, as a director, done You're a Big Boy Now, Finian's Rainbow, The Rain People, so it's hardly the greatest recommendation for taking him over to direct. So truthfully, we hired Francis as a result of his writing abilities. He had already won the Academy Award, just won it for Patton.
Coppola had initially turned Paramount's offer down. He didn't want to do a Hollywood gangster movie.
Anyone who remembers the original Godfather book, it had a lot of sleazy aspects to it that, of course, were cut out for the movie, and I didn't like it very much for those reasons, and I was very frightened of getting, once again, co-opted into another project like Low Budget. It was a very inexpensive film, and in those days, they wanted young directors because they wanted it cheap, and I did turn it down, actually, once or twice.
You know, the Zoetrope studio wasn't working, and I admired his idealism, but he did have some kids, and I reminded him rather frequently that he was broke and that this would be one way of getting out of it. And he kind of agreed.
While The Godfather preoccupied the higher-ups at Paramount, Bart and Evans gave the go-ahead to a bizarre little script helmed by a director considered extremely eccentric, even by the standards of 60s Hollywood.
The prototypical early 70s meeting, Hal Ashby, who couldn't pitch anything, you know, long, scruffy beard, the ultimate film geek.
For a guy who, when you first met him, looked like he would never be able to tie his own shoes and that you worried about if he was going to cross the street, who really would have surprised you if he'd ever later in life figured out how to work an ATM machine. But if you look behind that a bit, here's a man who manipulated the studios to do exactly as he wanted.
He comes in, he says, I'd like to introduce you to somebody who got a sense of this movie. He brings in Cat Stevens. Well, you know, Cat Stevens is not somebody you would even want to be in the same room with. He looked like a homeless person. And the two of them, in their inarticulate 60s way, start pitching Harold and Maude. And they had a great sense of the movie. But you know, Bob and I had spent a few months trying to persuade Hal to do it, not till he met Cat, and they came up with this idea for sort of like a mini opera. Did this thing make sense?
We were this kind of little unit that was out of sight, out of mind, so to speak. And they'd look at dailies. And, I mean, Hal had his philosophy was, here's a script, you've hired me as a director, I'm going to cast it, we've agreed on a budget, beat it. So midway through the cutting period, we had half the film that he sent off to Paramount, and they loved him. I mean, and they thought, they thought. And so that we had a Christmas release.
it's all right.
It's organic.
The first review was Murph in Variety, and it said, Harold and Maude is as funny as a burning orphanage. And that was a good one. I mean, Time said, we're going to do you a favor, we're not going to review it. So that was the end of it. I mean, it opened and closed in a week, and it was gone. Bingo. I mean, it was so weird. And we spent a year on it, you know, and nobody got it.
In the weeks before Christmas, 1971, Paramount Pictures began a nationwide campaign advertising The Godfather. They were doing something no studio had ever done, opening a film everywhere at once on an unprecedented 400 screens. The picture opened to phenomenal business, grossing over $80 million in its initial run. Nothing in Hollywood history had ever made this much money this fast.
They saw the amount of money that came through the door. It was suddenly hey, News Corp, everyone started looking at studios differently. They started looking at studios as real cash cows.
The success of The Godfather confirmed Francis Coppola as a genuine artist. He would use that power to help other directors, but first, he would bring the exiled George Lucas back to Hollywood.
And ultimately what got Graffiti made was they said, if Francis Coppola produces this film, you know, we'll do it.
George kept saying, I know people are going to love this movie. You know, I know it will be a big hit. And we kept saying, George, if you make this movie, consider yourself very fortunate. It was just the joy of creating something. You know, we didn't have to use stars. We didn't have to do anything according to the rules.
Hey, we're all done out here.
All done? What do you mean?
He means we're all done having loads of fun out here.
Loads of fun. Wow. Wonderful.
Yes.
You can have all the fun you want. This place is for fun.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Good luck,
Kurt,
sir.
before I say goodbye, I hope you'll be taking along with you a little piece of this place.
I think I have.
Good. Don't forget us.
No, I won't forget you, and you won't forget me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay.
Goodbye and good luck.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
It was nice to meet you. Right, what he said goes for me, too.
Yeah, you just might make it as a pharaoh yet, boy.
Everyone in that set believed and said and stated aloud that this was a classic film, that we were making a classic, a cult movie, a movie that would be important. And I said, what are you talking about? This is just a little movie. It's just a little thing. We're here in Modesto. We're not making history here.
I'll never forget the horror at which the people at Universal, when they looked at this picture, what is this? This is not even good enough to run on television. I mean, what is this thing? Someone said, well, the kids may like it. I said, the kids? But they don't go to the movies. The whole orientation was different.
There was a famous incident where where Francis said, if you don't like this movie and don't want to do anything with it, I do. I think it's great, and here's a check, and I'll buy it.
We had made an offer. There were discussions, and at the last moment, Universal smartly decided to preview it before an audience and deliberately invite some kids. And of course, I knew the jig was up, because the kids adored this movie. And the people at Universal said, we thought of selling this? We don't want to sell this movie. But there was no understanding about the youth market. That was later.
With the success of American Graffiti, the door swung open to Hollywood's next generation, which was coming ashore in Malibu.
And it was just one of my favorite surfing spots on the whole coast. And all of a sudden, I find all these people I know have houses there.
Donald Sutherland was an old lover of mine from Canada. He told me about this house on Nicholas Beach that was $400 a month, I think. It was a great house right on the beach with 2 bedrooms upstairs and in that hideous 60s A-line split-level style with an avocado green shag rug that was about that deep.
It was very beautiful and very free out there. The ocean was incredible. We were right on these beautiful dunes on a private road, and Michael and Julia Phillips rented a house down the beach.
Julia and Michael Phillips had just produced their first hit, The Sting, for Universal.
We met as neighbors and became very good friends and became, I guess, co-conspirators in a sense, unconscious co-conspirators, in that we began to mix our friends and relationships on a social level, but it became an important career thing.
We were quite arrogant, Jenny and I, about being the queen bees who decided who was in and who was out in this peculiar little rapidly growing crowd of misfits. Jenny was friends with Brian De Palma, who I promptly got a crush on.
They became an item, and he brought Marty out. Marty Scorsese, who brought Harvey Keitel out.
This odd friend of his, Harvey Keitel, who seemed to come with Marty in those days. He didn't get one without the other.
And then, like, Schrader was there.
Marty or Brian had another place, and Michael and Julia Phillips had another place, and somehow between the three places, people would run into each other.
I think Milius, did he know Brian, or did he know Margie?
Who first brought Bobby De Niro out? Who first brought Al Pacino out? That's easy. He was going out with Jill.
And Margie brought home her darling little friend, Steven Spielberg.
A bunch of actors, you know, lots of girls. I'm telling you, life was good.
Steven certainly wasn't a ladies' man, and Marty wasn't, and Paul Schrader wasn't. I think these were just like, the truth is, on some level, they were nerdy guys who wanted to hang out with each other and talk movies and make movies.
There was a chemistry going on between all these people having a chance to meet each other and talk and hang out.
Well, Julia Phillips, she pulled everybody together. And of course, she wanted to exploit everybody. But she actually had a very positive effect because she was full of enthusiasm. What movie do you want to do? Let's see if we can get this done.
We all really rooted for each other in every way, shape, and form. Went to each other's screenings, read each other's screenplays, offered suggestions, offered suggestions about each other's love life. It was all in the pod and up for grabs, and very much a communal experience.
Nicholas Beach, with its rabid film buff culture, would create both competition and inspiration. Imagine De Palma, Spielberg, Schrader, Milius, Scorsese, all arguing and fighting over movies, favorite directors, and possible projects. Ultimately, they drove each other to think and believe they could make great films. The young Scorsese at that point had only directed the Corman-produced Boxcar Bertha. He would prove his talent to his buddies on the beach with a film from the streets.
The characters in Mean Streets are a compilation of many characters in the neighborhood where I used to live, but he lived there all his life.
Jonathan Taplin was a rock and roll refugee from the band who decided to check out the movie business.
I was kind of arrogant enough. You know, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I figured if I could have produced, 300 rock and roll concerts the last 4 years, why couldn't I produce a movie? So I put some of my own money, and I put a couple of my friends' money, and we got together $500,000, and we made Mean Streets.
Come on, no. I won't say nothing to your friend, that's all. Hey, you know something? I wanted to ask you something, Charlie. I always wondered about her. This is the God's honest truth. I always wonder, what happens when she comes? Does she get a fit? What's that? What happens when she comes? I mean, Go fight fucking back! Don't ever hit me again! Don't! All right, I think I am gonna say now. Go ahead. Right now! Go on! I'll tear your fucking eyes out of your head! Mom, I want to kill you back! Go on! Teresa, what do you do? Do you know anything about this? Johnny! Hey, how should I know she's your fucking girl? Teresa, I gotta go. Get on! Come here! Get out! Teresa?
Marty had his circle of friends, and they loved the picture. They just totally loved it. They saw its originality.
I remember the first executive we showed it to, who shall remain nameless. He said after a few minutes, he got up and They said, listen, gentlemen, thanks for bringing it, but this is not going to work. So he walked out.
And so Marty's like dying. I'm like thinking, oh, gee, maybe I put my life savings into something that I'll never get it back. And then we came here to Warner Brothers, and the movie starts, and about 10 minutes in the movie, this waiter arrives. Who's got the tune on right? And Marty's just like, again, dying. This guy's standing right in the middle of the screen, the projector projecting the waiter on the screen. And eventually it settles down, and they're beginning to laugh, because these are New York guys. They understand that kind of Catholic, Jewish, weird New York humor. And I'm beginning to think, wow, this is going to be okay. And then about 2/3 of the way through the movie, John Calley was sitting way up front, gets up and starts to walk back. And I thought, oh my God, this is disastrous. He's leaving. And he comes and he sits down next to me and says, this is the best movie I've seen all year, but I have to take a leak. Would you mind stopping it for a minute? And I said, sure, what button do I push? You know, and so we stopped, he went out and came back. So we finished the movie, and he just got up and he said, we're buying it. You know, well, I don't want you to sell it to anybody else but us. And so that was like, all of a sudden we were up. Marty popped 2 Valiums, he was fine. And about 3 weeks later, we had a meeting with Jay Cox and Marty and Bob Evans. And he was saying, why didn't you guys sell this movie to us? we had to rat on Peter Bart.
Mean Streets opened to ecstatic critical reviews in an era when reviews really made a difference.
Well, obviously it was a different time, but there was a sense that film criticism was part of the movement, and that that film critics were there at the barricades, with the sort of political message of Godard and The Weekend and La Chinoise. And it seems rather preposterous today to think of a film critic as part of a political movement, but clearly that's how a lot of us thought of ourselves.
But even as the critics helped bring audiences back into the theaters, the studios were beginning to understand what kind of film could really bring in the dollars.
It opened in New York, and it did very well in New York, but then literally in the 5th or 6th week that they'd been working it, The Exorcist came out, and that just kind of sucked up all the Warner Brothers oxygen, and that was it. That's where they were going to take their energies.
With The Exorcist, Warner Brothers duplicated Paramount's Godfather strategy, opening the picture all over the country on hundreds of screens. The Exorcist was Billy Friedkin's second hit after the hugely successful French Connection, and he joined the growing list of directors who could do no wrong. Hollywood now belonged to the auteurs. Eagerly grabbing up these new media stars, Paramount's Charlie Bluhdorn set up the Directors Company with William Friedkin, Francis Coppola, and Peter Bogdanovich, ignoring growing industry concern about inflated directorial egos.
It was a signal to the industry that the producer could be pushed off to the side, and the directors were the people that would be charged with the responsibility of making the picture. Nobody ever suggested the director wasn't the director of the movie, but then nobody should complain when you give him 100% freedom about why the pictures are costing so much or why they're not talking to the studio. And I think that was a terrible mistake.
Coppola's first film for the newly formed company was The Conversation, a small, artful film that took a long time to recoup its relatively small budget.
Oh, really? I didn't mean to tell you on that level. No, I understand.
Bogdanovich folded his already shooting Paper Moon into the new company.
What company you say you're from?
But then stumbled with his follow-up picture, Daisy Miller. After viewing Daisy Miller and The Conversation, Billy Friedkin bailed on his friends at the Directors Company to make the hugely expensive Sorcerer. The picture flopped and seriously damaged Friedkin's career. As the budgets and egos grew, a self-righteous sense of artistic entitlement began separating Hollywood from the rest of the outside world, which at that moment was exploding. U.S. involvement with the war was still expanding, and the ghettos were still aflame. There were exceptions to this self-involvement, however. Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson had continued PBS's successful run of films with Rafelson's 5 Easy Pieces. But Bert, having conquered Hollywood, was turning his attention away from make-believe.
Bert felt the need, in the expression, the colloquialism, to put his money where his mouth was. He believed in certain things and he supported them. Bert's involvements with other non-filmic things, such as Huey Newton and the Black Panthers, such as Abby Hoffman, who Bert supported while he was underground.
Huey Newton would be at those parties. I don't know a lot of the specifics, but sort of legend has it that he got some guns to the Panthers.
In 1974, Bert would produce the Academy Award-winning documentary on the Vietnam War, Hearts and Minds. Accepting his Oscar, Schneider would read a telegram conveying greetings of friendship to all American people from Vietnam's revolutionary government. There was a moment of shocked silence before a burst of applause and scattered hisses. Meanwhile, Sam Peckinpah was continuing his politically incorrect ways. After scoring with the violent Wild Bunch, he had alienated women with the sexist Straw Dogs.
Sam was like a dog that you love, but he's always doing something that kind of embarrasses you,
I don't even think Sam would be allowed to get into L.A., much less work in L.A. He was a total outlaw, and he was one of the last of a breed. He was like one of the Wild Bunch,
But there was clearly a case of a real survivor. I mean, Sam had the mentality. He was he couldn't really create until he was face down in the barroom, dead broke, with everyone standing around laughing at him.
Dylan came to see me, and by that time we had cast Christopherson. He said, I got to tell you that in a past life I was Billy the Kid. So I said, well, that's great, Bob, that's what you're in, So 2 weeks later, we flew down to Durango together, and we went to see Sam. It was like late at night. Sam lived on kind of outside of town, and we walked up towards the house, and there was this scream out of the house, and this maid ran out, just terrified. And we heard a shot. And I thought, oh man, this is gonna blow the whole thing with Bob,
Hey, Pete, who's that out there?
I knocked on Sam's door, and there was no answer. I pushed open the door, and Sam was standing in front of this mirror, completely naked, with a gun in his hand. This mirror was totally blown to hell, and he was like looking at his reflection, and didn't say anything. He had a bottle in one hand and a gun in the other, and I said, Sam, this is Bob Dylan.
In the end, Dylan's soundtrack would make more money than Peckinpah's film.
He was trying to make something good. Unfortunately, it was so much creative energy I felt was expended in fighting the guys who were supposed to be on his side, the studio or the producers or whatever.
As the alcoholic Peckinpah fought MGM over his director's cut, a rising star gave one of the boys from Malibu his first studio gig. Ellen Burstyn had just become a big star on Warner Brothers' The Exorcist, when the studio offered her a picture where she could pick the director.
So I called Francis Coppola. I asked him, do you know anybody new and exciting? And he said, well, look at a film called Mean Streets. Marty came in, and I said, I loved your movie, but it's really all about men, and this one picture is from a woman's point of view, and I can't tell from that movie if you know anything about women at all, do you? And he said, no, but I'd like to learn. So I thought that was as good an answer as I could ever imagine.
Scorsese decided to surround himself with women for Alice, partially to help him artistically, and partially to protect himself. Scorsese made his girlfriend Sandy Weintraub the film's associate producer, then hired Toby Rafelson, who had recently split from husband Bob after he'd become far too open about his numerous sexual infidelities. And finally, George Lucas's wife Marcia came on as editor.
That's okay, Roy. That's okay, you run.
But in Hollywood, the only relationships that seemed to last were between men. At Paramount, Bob Evans and pals Roman Polanski, Jack Nicholson, and Robert Towne were creating a classic noir tale of 1930s Los Angeles, a film made even darker when Polanski, still carrying the scars of his wife's murder, insisted on changing Towne's script to reflect what he saw as reality. Faye Dunaway's character is murdered, and her daughter returned to her incestual father. Chinatown's artistic success would justify the studio's faith in the director as auteur. By the middle of the 70s, audiences had returned to the movie theaters. Films like The Godfather, American Graffiti, and The Exorcist were packing them in. A new generation of directors, like Coppola, Bogdanovich, Hopper, Penn, Peckinpah, Scorsese, and Altman, had made movies relevant again, with handcrafted films that spoke to modern audiences. But now that the studios had those audiences back, did they really have to deal with the huge egos and autocratic control that these directors demanded? Before the studio heads could even articulate this question, the first cracks were already appearing in this auteurist utopia.
Trouble is, the studios, when they think you're infallible, suddenly you're fallible, you make a mistake, you screw up, they lose some money, then they get nervous about the next one.
Peter Bogdanovich stumbled badly with At Long Last Love and Daisy Miller. Dennis Hopper's career was temporarily lost in a snowstorm of drugs and paranoia. And now that BBS had essentially shut down, Bob Rafelson watched his directorial ambitions collapse under the weight of The King of Marvin Gardens and Stay Hungry. And Robert Altman, after 4 commercial flops, adroitly sidestepped studio indifference to Nashville by involving critic Pauline Kael early on in editing. Her fierce endorsement helped turn the film into the last commercial success Altman would enjoy for many years.
What happened to the directors like Peter, like Altman, like Peckinpah? These guys were doing whatever they wanted, and they were smoking dope, and they were drinking, and, they lost their minds. I really think that's what happened, It was the age of excess.
We didn't know enough. We were too successful. We probably were somewhat arrogant. I speak for a lot of us. And we made some mistakes, made big mistakes.
As the directors started stumbling, star Warren Beatty positioned himself to take control.
Honey!
My God, it's Lester! Get out! Get out!
Jackie?
Oh, God, do something, please.
Baby, sleeping? Jackie? Jackie?
Oh, shut the door, honey. Come on.
Oh, sorry.
Warren had a lot to say about the production, obviously because he was co-writing it and co-producing, and actually it was his baby.
Hal was frustrated by it on a certain level because, like most directors, he wanted to be in charge. And I don't think he was in charge on that particular film.
Warren is a very unique person too, and he is so strong. He's, whatever he has in mind, one way or another, he's gonna get it. So here was the situation between him and Hal, who's also equally very strong. So he said, "Okay," he says, "we're gonna do my takes first." And we did 8 or 10 takes, and Hal says, "Okay, I'm happy now. Let's do, whatever."
And hey, it was Hal's most successful film. I mean, so what do you say?
Shampoo was so successful, it momentarily gave Ashby the clout to make his next picture without stars. Bound for Glory was a biography of singer Woody Guthrie and his attempts to help organize poor and disenfranchised workers into unions. Ashby, like the artist in his film, was uncompromising, and the picture soon went far over budget and, worse, failed to connect with an audience. The public's taste was changing, and it would be fed by one of the movie nerds from Malibu.
I was so deeply unaware of what was going on in studios, and so many of us were, I didn't really get that part of Stephen until later. He did know what was going on at the studios. He was the wonderkind. I think he dropped a year off his age somewhere there, or a couple, I think. I'm sure he did. Because he started out older than me.
Steven Spielberg had become a universal contract director in television. and then had risen out of that ghetto with the TV movie Duel. He was 28 years old when he started the movie that would change him and the movie business forever.
I saw him become a huge character. The demands that were, and pressures that were thrown at him that were staggeringly difficult and painful, and he rose. He just did it. He did his job.
Well, for a writer, it wasn't too tough, except that I was writing, a few days ahead of the schedule, and I shared a house with Steven, so we would talk about nothing but the film. Luckily, I didn't have to go on the water for the last 2 months when Steven, Roy, and Ricky were going out every day with Robert and the crew to get maybe 30 seconds of usable film.
Bad weather, ships on the horizon, and a recalcitrant mechanical shark soon drove the picture wildly over budget and dangerously behind schedule. 2/3 of the way through the shoot, the studio flew out to see for themselves why the picture was in trouble. They were met by a director who didn't smoke, didn't drink, and was willing to set aside his own ego when dealing with studio executives. The result? The Universal suits went back to Hollywood, and Spielberg finished his film.
I left the shoot like on a Wednesday, whatever. We were wrapped. After 6 months, we were wrapping. But we still had a couple of more shots to go, including the shot which exploded the shark. Roy Scheider goes, bam, and the shark. It's a pretty involved and intricate shot. And so I had flown to Boston. And then I met Steven in Boston and got on the plane with him to LA. And I said, so how did the shot go? And he said, they're doing it now. I said, well, why aren't you there? And he kind of gave me this insane grin, and he had bailed. He just said, I can't do this, And he had put that shot in the hands of his AD, and he had skipped, which was his way of going totally and completely insane.
While Spielberg and editor Verna Fields started to assemble the shark movie, some of the other filmmakers from Malibu were slipping a dark nightmare through the studio gates.
Well, I had gone to UCLA Film School. I'd gone to the AFI. I was the fellow the very first year it began, when it was all free. And then a number of things had fallen apart in my life. I was in debt. I wasn't making any money. Marriage had fallen apart. I had left the AFI in protest over some of their policies. So I really didn't have much of a place to go or much of a life. I took to wandering and kind of drifting around. And it was out of that period of drifting and drinking that I started having this pain, and finally went to the hospital, and I had an ulcer, 26 years old. And I realized in the emergency area that I hadn't spoken to anybody in weeks. I had just been drifting around in this car, sleeping in my car. And so the metaphor of the taxi driver came to me.
Second call, 404 Hamilton, 417. 195. Alfano, 448.
De Niro. In Bang the Drum Slowly, the critics called him a brilliant new talent. After Mean Streets, they said he was a genius. For his performance in The Godfather Part 2, they gave him the Academy Award.
Come on, man. Just get me out of here, all right?
Now, Robert De Niro creates a terrifying portrait of life on the edge of madness.
Tabby, just forget about this. It's nothing.
Taxi Driver, a film by Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, people do anything in front of a taxi driver. I mean, anything. People too cheap to rent a hotel room.
Oh, driver, hurry up, will you?
People want to embarrass you. It's like you're not even there. It's like, like a taxi driver doesn't even exist. This city here is like an open sewer, It's full of filth and scum.
I think I know what you mean, Travis.
It was one of those scripts that banged around Hollywood, and everyone said, gee, this is really a good script. Somebody should make it, but of course not us. And then things started coming together. Michael and Julia got a Best Oscar for The Sting. Marty had a hit with Alice Doesn't Live Here. Bobby got an Oscar for Godfather 2. And all of a sudden, at $2 million, Beagleman and Julia Phillips were friends, and Julia said, everybody says somebody should make this. Why don't you make it? And he's finally just said, why not? Okay.
Scorsese was very nervous. He was had every kind of asthma condition. He was, just afraid of being chewed up by the system. He obviously been banged around in some of his filmmaking experiences and just wanted to get through with his work without being too badly mauled.
In order to get a green light from the studio, Phillips and Scorsese went forward with what they knew would be an inadequate budget.
We were the Enron of Columbia Pictures at that time. We kept the truth hidden. We made promises. And then we'd go out and shoot something we'd say we were going to drop. And they would freak out. You were supposed to drop this. You're not authorized to shoot it. Sorry. It wasn't, it's okay. We thought we could do it on the same day. They're just playing a role.
For Taxi Driver, the boys from Malibu Beach closed ranks protectively around Scorsese. Sybil Shepherd was practically visiting royalty.
She came in because the studio wanted one more name in the cast.
At the time, I had 2 offers at Columbia Pictures. I had Taxi Driver and I had Nickelodeon. And David Beagleman said I couldn't do both. And I talked to Peter and we both agreed. I said, I need to do Taxi Driver because we were no longer reviewed for our work after At Long Last Love, Peter and I. We were so obnoxious in the press, Look at us, like, we're in love and we don't have to be married. I mean, that was a revolutionary premise in those times. We were the first couple to ever be on the cover of a magazine that were living together in sin.
Her partner's film, Nickelodeon, would make money for Columbia Pictures, but not enough to reverse the perception that Bogdanovich had lost his touch. And in a business where perception is everything, Steven Spielberg's shark film was about to change Hollywood's perception of what success really meant.
Had I seen it? No, I guess I hadn't seen it yet. I was in New York, and the studio told me that the film was going to be shown at the Rivoli Theater on such and such a night, and so I go down to the Rivoli Theater, and there's 1,500 or 2,000 people there. So we start watching this movie. Now, I'm in the movie, and I forgot that I was in it. I was so swept up in the fear and the storytelling, and I completely forgot that was me. I had no idea. I was appropriately terrified and scared, and it was incredible. And then the audience did something that I had never heard, ever. And maybe it had been done before, but the movie ends, and the entire building erupts in a sound that was extraordinary. Screaming, yelling, applauding, yelling, screaming, Gewalt.
That's a 20-footer.
25. 3 tons, Alan.
You're gonna need a bigger boat, right?
Gotta get to work.
How do we handle this?
Go for it, Martin, I need you.
He's circling the boat, Martin.
Come on.
Lou Wasserman, Sid Sheinberg, Henry H. Hyatt Martin, and Charlie Powell, who were, Martin was head of distribution, Powell was head of marketing and publicity, met in the men's room of the theater, because it was the only place where they could talk. And Wasserman said, put it out in 12, as many screens as we can get. And they went for 1,200 screens, which was at that time unheard of.
This was a big decision to try to take Jaws and put it out there like they used to do with exploitation pictures. Well, exploitation pictures were meant to come in, make a lot of money before anybody noticed how bad they were, and get out.
When I saw Jaws, I thought, uh-oh, these guys understand what I and my contemporaries are doing, and they have the money and the talent and skill to do them bigger and better.
By the winter of 75-76, Universal's Jaws had rolled up $100 million at the box office. It was the first motion picture in history to do so. Everyone knew everything had changed. Taxi Driver opened later that year to ecstatic reviews and decent business, but decent business wasn't enough anymore. The age of the blockbuster had arrived, and as the grosses climbed, the pressures mounted, and so did the casualties.
Well, I had started using cocaine and amphetamines way before the success, and in fact had quite a bit of success, working behind it. And in fact, I was thinking yesterday, things I might say about it, and there was a definite progression that went from using it as a tool to using it as a crutch, and then it became, you weren't using it for anything except that it was life itself.
In the new Hollywood, Julia Phillips was just one of the legion of movie professionals for whom cocaine was a perk and a tool.
When I was directing Blue Collar and I was in pre-production, the producer at that time, Bert Schneider, actually came into my office about 7 o'clock at night, put a vial on my desk and said, "Here, this will help you work longer." And it was, almost medicinal.
There was a time in Hollywood where you could actually see people snorting coke in public. And you could see people snorting coke in public who you knew, who were like, they had authority, they had responsibility. Now, at that time, I was like completely over my head.
We went to an AFI tribute for Alfred Hitchcock one year during this period. And I went to the men's room, and I swear to God, under every single stall, there was at least 6 or 8 legs. The sound of snorting was so loud that it was just like a joke. And there was this one kind of old washroom attendant sitting there trying to hand out towels. And it was comical. And here's old Alfred Hitchcock up there getting his Life Achievement Award, and all the Hollywood Teufel were in there snorting cocaine. It was crazy.
As drugs overran the Hollywood social scene, the movies themselves began to be affected.
This was the beginning of also the craziness for everyone.
Fresh off the critical success of Taxi Driver, Marty Scorsese could do anything he wanted. His choice? An almost impossible blending of Golden Age Hollywood musical and Cassavetes like emotional catharsis.
Well, New York reflects the unique state of mind that Marty was in at that time. He was having a terrible trouble with his marriage with Julia. He was having an affair with Liza Minnelli. He was staying up all night. He had pushed it to the edge of the envelope.
The private life is kind of screwed up, so you begin to live in a fast lane because you want to kind of get some benefit out of where you are, but you can't because your work is always, they're always in the back of your head with a gun, They paid you, deliver,
All this emotional chaos and everybody doing too much cocaine didn't help solve the artistic problems.
Marty was very clever that we started with the musical numbers. So 2 weeks, that's all we shot. When we finished, he invited for screening Vincent Minnelli, everybody. It's just a big gala, it was a rap party, And they showed this, it was about 15, 20 minutes musical number. And it was, I was even surprised. It was fabulous, it was moving and all great song. And from that point on, the studio, gave Marty anything.
I didn't know that, that this was kind of drugs or us going on this movie. I wasn't, at the time, I never tried drugs, so I didn't know what it smelled like, looked like, or what people were like when they were on it.
Ultimately, Scorsese kicked the drugs and recovered. Some didn't. In the deserts of Nevada, Sam Peckinpah was driving Convoy off the road.
Cocaine and booze was a big problem. And that would certainly explain a lot of the delays. I was on the wagon then, and Sam wasn't. And I would stay pretty much in my trailer. I didn't want to get out and get in trouble. And they actually fired him at one point. And I told him that I would walk if he weren't kept on the film. We were standing outside the saloon where the truck stop where the fight was, and he came up behind me. He says, "You son of a bitch, I was out of here." And I said, "Well, you son of a bitch, you got me into here." You know, he was in rough shape.
Time and time again, he would ruin himself financially. He'd ruin his personal life. He'd ruin his reputation, and then so he could do this whole Phoenix act. It didn't work with cocaine. He did fall flat down on the face down on the floor again with cocaine. Only this time he couldn't get up. A different drug, you know.
William Blake said the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. It also leads to the grave, you know.
Sam Peckinpah made one more picture, the compromised Osterman Weekend, before dying of heart failure at the age of 59 in Mexico. Most said he was the victim of his own excesses.
People can always say you're your own victim, but there are times that people have great talent, and that talent has to be nourished in some way. And if this industry can't nourish it, then they become victims, and then their self-indulgence sometimes takes over, and nobody pulls them up and pulls them out. I mean, if you write screenplay after screenplay after screenplay, or deal after deal after deal that you see fall apart and go away and so on, and you never lose your enthusiasm for wanting to make film, you're a victim. That's all.
Malibu resident producer provocateur Julia Phillips would finally drive the drug scene underground when she publicly flamed out on Steven Spielberg's high-profile follow-up to Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Julia and I were pretty terrible. But as far as I was concerned, in the midst of Julia's Hazarai craziness, Gewalt, she also was a hard worker.
Julia fought the battles on this. We were divorced at this time, and she ran into problems, as everybody knows, late in the post-production and drug problems, and had to be removed, and I got back on and worked with Steven to finish the film.
Some years later, she wrote a book. So I go to the bookstore. I'm reading what Julia is writing about me, and I am getting seriously angry, seriously furious. And I'm gonna kill her, and I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that. And all of a sudden, I hear this little voice. And the voice inside my head is saying, "Richard, what really happened was so much worse. Leave it alone." And I left it alone. I didn't know Julia in the last few years of her life. No, I don't know. She wasn't happy. She wasn't in good circumstances. But I never hated her for that. I just, I was there. I did that stuff.
Drugs and excess may have derailed some of Hollywood's new generation, but it was nothing compared to the growing success of the easily promotable B movies that audiences were embracing. But this was a new kind of B movie. Instead of a low-budget programmer to fit the bottom of double bill, these films were expensive, special effects-driven pictures like Close Encounters that could endanger a studio if they failed. Over in England and in computer labs in California, George Lucas was quietly laboring on the ultimate B movie.
So George got, from American Graffiti, he got to make a $13 million movie, which was a huge budget in those days. It was giant. And I remember he called and he said, I don't know if it's going to work at Fox. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, they're not going to give me the rights to any sequels. I said, George, sequels? You're lucky to get $13 million for this movie, He said, no, I want to control it, and I want the sequels and so forth. And he held firm, and he ended up owning the rights to Star Wars.
And he said, I'm gonna make more money by making science fiction toys. I'm gonna make more money than even the Godfather by making science fiction toys. And he hated directing, George did, because he got sick all the time. He had diabetes, and he just wasn't very sturdy, and he got sick. And he always would talk, he would say, porno, that's the answer. He says, it's a warm room. If you don't get the right location, you go get another. I mean, people really don't care what room, as long as it's a pretty nice room.
So if he hadn't done Star Wars or American Graffiti, he would probably own this huge porno network today. You know, he'd probably be even richer than he is.
At the first rough-cut screening of Star Wars, the directorial division of opinion would foretell the future of movies.
George called his friends and said, I want everybody to see a rough cut of Star Wars. And it was hard to watch because it was, the special effects, nothing was there yet.
So what we saw was very crude World War II footage where the effects would be. And even for experienced people, it takes a lot to look at a rough cut.
And Brian De Palma was particularly sarcastic and, what's this crap about the Force, what is the force of others, but George listened and he took it sort of good-naturedly, and the only one who was really optimistic was Spielberg. He said, I think it's great, it's going to make $100 million, and we thought, well, Steve's just Steve, sort of energetic kid. Once he started screening it again, it was like American Graffiti, the audiences just went nuts.
Hollywood, California, August 1977. A triumphant moment in screen history. To the world-famous Chinese theater come the stars of the biggest box office success in motion picture history.
The financial success of Star Wars would, with The Exorcist, Jaws, and Close Encounters, essentially end the epoch of the director-driven film and begin the era of the big-budget B-movie, where the studios could open a film everywhere with nationwide ad campaigns and fast playoffs. It almost didn't matter if the film was good or not, just as long as it made a great trailer.
Thousands are gathered to see the metallic megastars place their footprints in cement in the theater's courtyard. As the two heroes of Star Wars make their indelible impressions on the ground reserved for Movieland's legends, the world resounds with the fact that Star Wars itself has become a full-fledged social phenomenon. It has become more than just a movie.
Star Wars was the ultimate triumph of the B-movie. It had taken little more than a decade for the studios to regain their dominance and find their new audience with slick, effects-driven sci-fi horror films, ironic superheroes, and sequels. Endless sequels.
The era of the director, brief era of the director, came to a conclusion in really certainly by the end of the 70s, if not sooner. It was sort of petering out.
They started figuring out the mechanism of what was making money. And so that they wouldn't be in this horrible position of having filmmakers walk in the door and say, you don't know what makes money, I do, I'll make the movie. So finally, after about 10 years, they were able to say, yes, we do know what makes money, and you will make it for us.
I mean, the system allowed these artists to create. And then after a while, when it became essentially conglomerates took over the studios, everything changed.
I think the thing that killed, for me, movies more than anything was the event of Entertainment Tonight, when they started doing box office scores, like football scores. And I remember seeing it the first weekend that they did it, or the first Monday, that this film had come in first and this second, and I looked at that screen and I said, we're over.
In 1979, director Marty Scorsese, exhausted and convinced his career was over, decided to leave Hollywood. But, urged on by Robert De Niro, Scorsese summoned up one last primal scream of defiance.
These are clean, whistling shots. How he can survive them, nobody knows. No man can endure this pummeling. The fight is stopped on the signal to Frankie Secora. Row after row after row from the ring, the crowd is standing and cheering as he just cannonaded Jake LaMotta into a death defeat. And when I say that, I mean Jake wouldn't want to quit. He wanted to go.
Hey, Ray. Never went down, Ray. You never got me down, Ray. You hear me? Never got me down. Yeah? See?
And in the 13th round, the hard luck round.
I have a mansion, forget the price.
Ain't never been there, they tell me it's nice. I live in hotels, tear out the walls. I have accountants pay for it all. They say I'm crazy, but I have a good time. I'm just looking for clues at the scene of the crime. Life's been good to me so far. My Maserati does 185. I lost my license, now I don't drive. I have a limo out in the back. I lock the doors in case I'm attacked. I'm making records, my fans, they can't wait. They write me letters, tell me I'm great. So I got me an office, cold records on the wall. Just leave 'em